to this beautiful church of Abington in Maru, County Limerick. I'm adding in all the different addresses, and I'll talk about the difference between Abington and Maru at a later stage. But for now, you are so very welcome to the third LeFanu Festival. Is there a little bit of an echo?
There's a bit of feedback. Yes.
Or feedback? Maybe, is that okay? Is that all right for people in the audience? Okay. I'm McBurnie Walsh, and I'm one of the organisers, and later on I'm going to do one of the talks, and along with Julie Long, Miriam Lohan and John Elliott, all here doing various bits of work. We put the festival together. Our third one, we started during COVID lockdown, got the bright idea of celebrating the very interesting link of the LeFanu family to this area. In previous years we had talks about some of that history, so I won't go through it all now, but just to very briefly explain to you how it came about. In 1825, Thomas LeFanu came to the area as rector and then dean of Emly, and he was in the parish until 1845, the year of his death. His wife came with them, and they had 3 children who were in their early teens at the time. So Joseph Sheridan LeFanu, William LeFanu, and Catherine LeFanu. And we're going to hear more about Catherine today. Joseph Sheridan is well known as the famous Gothic story writer. William LeFanu, we actually explored his life a lot in the last festival because he was very instrumental in the rollout of the railway network in Ireland. And Catherine LeFanu, well, we're going to hear more, as I said, in a little while from one of our speakers about her life and times. So the last festival, which was held in 2022, was really, it seemed to focus a lot on Joseph Sheridan and on William. So this time around we thought it's time for the women to get their look in. And among other delights, we're delighted to have Nicola LeFanu, a great-granddaughter of William, here to talk today about some of the achievements of the women in the family, more broadly, beyond the Limerick connection. But the Limerick connection is quite strong. The family were here, and are some of them buried in the graveyard, and McBurnie is going to tell us more about that in just a little while. So I have the job just to do a little bit of business, which is to say, some of you have already found where the teas are at the back, and we will have refreshments at around 1:15 for a cup of tea and a coffee and a biscuit again later on after the talks. And there's also a toilet outside for anyone who needs to use it. It would be very nice. Obviously the festival's free, but on the way in or way out, if you'd like to leave a donation for the upkeep of the church, that would be we're very grateful to the wardens Elizabeth and Bertie for once again allowing us to use this beautiful building for the festival, and it's nice to be able to contribute towards its upkeep. I have various people I want to thank at the very end, but I'll just mention the wardens, Neil Sloan, the Dean in St Mary's Cathedral right now, and Maru, her Historical Society, because they've all been so very supportive of this event. And I think that's all I have to say right now. I'm going to kick off by handing you over to David McBurnie. He's a local historian and living locally. He's going to be joined by Gráinne Keys, also a local historian, and they're going to talk about Catherine and her life and times. And I'll pass you over now to David.
Can I just put this down for a moment? Sorry? Oh, I beg your pardon. I thought I was going to... Oh, sorry. I need to just... That's a very good start.
I can move it over here.
That's the kind of grand entrance.
absolutely hopeless with technology. Okay?
Do you want to step down here without the, just a bit closer then?
Yes, that's fine. Well, I mean, Grania has introduced me as a local historian. I'm actually the Church of Ireland lay reader here, and I do the 2 services here. So I'm sort of really quite connected with the church. Grania has actually introduced the LeFanu connection with Abington. In 1815, Thomas LeFanu was appointed chaplain to the military academy in the Phoenix Park in Dublin, and in 1823 he was granted the living of Abington. Now, you might think that living in the Phoenix Park was not the ideal training ground for living in rural Ireland, particularly in a place which was a spot on the map at the time. There was very little here at that time. And I think it's fair to say, I don't know, some may correct me on this, that probably not many of the family had actually experienced life beyond the Pale. So in 1826, I think it was, they fortunately Thomas LeFanu was able to move with the family into the glebe house and assume permanent residency here. Now, the glebe house was a handsome building, still is. It was built in 1804, so the accommodation was reasonably good. But there was a problem, and that is that Thomas LeFanu, largely because of economics, had been an absentee rector for a number of years. Now, he hadn't neglected, even staying in Dublin, he hadn't neglected Abington. He'd given services there and so on. But it did not go down well. It did not go down well in the parish, and it certainly didn't go down well with the Catholic priest, Father Costello. Now, the relationship with the Catholic priest is very important. Thomas LeFanu was probably unfortunate, really, in that the relationship between Father Costello and Thomas LeFanu's predecessor, John Jebb, was absolutely, well, I mean, it was a wonderful relationship. And the parish was reasonably quiet from the religious point of view because of that. But certainly Father Costello took a very dim view of Thomas LeFanu's absenteeism. What could have been a very fruitful relationship, unfortunately wasn't. And I think probably if Father Costello was expecting a kind of recreation of his relationship with Jebb, well, it didn't happen. And so when Thomas LeFanu arrived with his family into the parish of Abington, the atmosphere was, shall we say, tense. And you can imagine a parish of 6,000 Catholics and a very tiny Church of Ireland minority, and everybody paying tithes. Not good. And we can get a sense of where the tension came from if we sort of pay attention to the words of Father Costello. In 1825, he was called to give evidence to the House of Commons Select Committee in London on the condition of Ireland. In other words, why was there so much tension in Irish society? And this is what he says. He draws attention to the way in which the Catholic population of Abington feel, and I'll quote his exact words, the degradation which, small though the number of persons in the parish is excited by the supercilious conduct of some of those persons towards them in their transactions of life, showing that they feel a superiority by which others are degraded. Now those are pretty strong words levelled at the Protestant population. Now, whatever you think about it, I mean, whether Father Costello was reflecting the goodwill eroded by Thomas LeFanu's absenteeism, and certainly he refers specifically in his evidence to the Select Committee, he refers specifically to Thomas LeFanu. Now that's very difficult to say, but there was a degree of hostility levelled towards the family. Now, that hostility, well, you can only say it was much worsened by the Tithe Wars, which broke out in 1830. I mean, Catholic emancipation obviously had been, the Catholic population had been energised by O'Connell and the Catholic emancipation issue, but the Catholic emancipation was largely a political issue to do with the Catholics taking their seats at Westminster and so on. The Tithe Wars were very much locally based. I'm afraid that the situation was so volatile that a lot of hostility, unfortunately, was directed towards the family in the rectory, in the deanery. And it actually, I think, I'm not going to go into detail about this, but the explosive event involved the parish priest in Doon, Father Coote, who actually provoked an incident which had considerable repercussions. It was a very serious incident. I'm not going to go into the details about it, some of you know what I'm talking about. And we can say, and this is a quotation from one of the commentators on this subject, Coote became a marked man, and some of the resentment he inspired rubbed off onto the LeFanus. Now, the person who, unfortunately, seems to have borne the brunt of this is Catherine, because she was sensitive, highly intelligent, reflective, thoughtful, and unfortunately, from the arrival in Abington in poor health. There's shortly after the family's arrival, Thomas LeFanu was unable to preach on one occasion, one of the rector's family being taken suddenly and dangerously ill. Now, you can't escape the fact that there has to be Catherine, age 14. And it's an ominous note. It's an ominous note because, unfortunately, illness was something that dogged Catherine. But the incident, and you can understand it, what this commentator says is that some of the resentment inspired by this chap Coote and the incident in which he was involved rubbed off onto the LeFanus. None of the family went out alone, and they were at all times armed. When Catherine, with some girl cousins, visitors to the glebe, ventured out unprotected, they were pelted with mud and stones, and any excursion by the family was greeted with shouts and cursing. Now, you can only imagine the traumatic effect that would have had on someone like Catherine. And a similar picture is described by John Wickham, LeFanu's curate, who unfortunately happened to be also the collector of tithes. Now, that didn't help at all, because there's an intimate connection there between the church and the tithing system. And this is what Wickham writes. A set of ruffians are in the daily habit, in their passage to and from a bog in the neighbourhood of Dean LeFanu's residence, of using the most horrid threats and imprecations against that gentleman and his family, threatening them with the fate of the Reverends Messrs. Going and Whitty, who were murdered. Now that gives you an idea of the degree of hostility, and the daily and hourly insults to every member of the Dean's family that are disgusting and terrific beyond measure. It's not a comfortable situation at all. Now, in 1832, William and Joseph left for Dublin to start their careers, and yes, of course, it's natural that they would do that, but it meant that the family, in particular Catherine, were more exposed than ever to the hostility of the Catholic population. And Catherine drew up her will in 1833, at the age of 20. Now, if you draw up your will at the age of 20, it does suggest that you don't think, or you don't have a sense that your life is going to be very long. But it has to be said that Catherine was not always ill. She was not always delicate. She did very good works in the parish, and William's book, 70 Years of Irish Life, indicates that people living much later in the century speak of Miss Catherine and her good works. And she certainly, one mission that she had was to teach English to Gaelic-speaking tenants. So a worthy cause. But unfortunately, it was cut short because increasing hostility made excursions from the rectory impossible. And in fact, Catherine herself was attacked in 1832, the spring of 1832, and effectively from then on until her death confined to the rectory, the deanery. But there were consolations for her in the fact that she became effectively de facto head of the household, and she also, I think, found a consolation in her religious faith, even though she had doubts, as many people had at the time, particularly doubts that whether the training that she'd had in religion had anything to do with the Gospels. And that is an issue that many people have struggled with. So she, as I say, became really a prisoner in the rectory. Now, Thomas LeFanu attempted to dampen down the situation by reducing the hostility to the payment of tithes by reducing the amount of it. But it failed, and effectively the family's income from tithes dried up, and they faced quite straitened circumstances. But I think it gives you some sense of Catherine's strength of character, that she was not fazed by that at all. She said, we manage on reduced income. Now, her health continued to decline, and she died March the 25th, 1841. Now, I think that my view is that in the time that she spent in the rectory, she had time to reflect on the reality of the family's situation. And I think, being such an intelligent girl, she knew, and I think Joseph knew as well, that there was an enormous gap between how the how the Protestant minority imagined themselves, the degree of power and authority and indispensability that they thought they had, the reality was that as time progressed, not only were the focus of hostility, but they were just treated with indifference. What did it matter who they were? They were nothing. And I think she knew that. She knew that distinction, and so did he. And see, what strikes me, I'll just finish in a minute, that if you set what we've just been saying against the picture that you get in 70 years of Irish life, it doesn't fit. Just listen to this. This is William LeFanu describing how, when the LeFanu family went away and came back, he says about the Catholic parishioners, they appeared to be devoted to us. If we'd been away for a month or two, on our return, they met us in numbers, some way from our home, took the horses from the carriage and drew it to our house amid deafening cheers of welcome, and at night bonfires blazed on the neighbouring hills. Oh, yes. Well, again, as another commentator has said, this seems to present a pretty idealised view of the relationship between the family and the community. If it ever existed, I don't know. I really don't know. So, effectively, she knew, I'm sure, the reality of the gap between her people and the people. I think what happened to her was very sad, but I think, as I tried to indicate, she was a strong woman in many respects. Intelligent, reflective, serious, and someone, I think, to be respected. So I'll hand over now to Rolia. I think we have some pictures there. Yeah, that's the military academy where Thomas LeFanu had been the chaplain, and yeah, that's the glebe house as it was probably 60s, something like that. I mean, it's much changed now because it's a business now, but there's still parts of it that are authentic. They can still see it as it was when they were there. And there is Catherine in profile. So Ronnie, I think, is going to talk about burials.